Basically, humanity has spent more time in tribes than out of them. Tribalism seems ingrained in us, like someone said in the social. The question is that a bad thing? I would argue if you have the right tribe, tribalism can be good. And my Cliff Notes version of this, the too long didn't read version, or the Cliff Notes version, TLDR is the new way of saying the Cliff Notes version for people that aren't old enough to know what Cliff Notes are. And That's basically what Ginny said, which is the tribe of being a reasonable human being. And I'm going to go into that in more detail. Now, there is a catch, and that's kind of the catch to me to what the right tribe means. Um, and we'll discuss in the Q&A portion whether or not you guys agree with my definition. We always like disagreement, polite disagreement in the Q&A portion. So feel free to jot down your questions and your concerns and your own opinions to be able to share them in the Q&A portion. So because we take questions at the end by popular opinion, people wanted to see the arguments laid out and then come back to Q&A afterwards. So that's what we do now. I used to like to take questions in the middle, but people felt like it distracted from the logical arguments being made. So here's the definition of tribalism. This is the top one is the dictionary definition, a strong loyalty to one's own tribe, group, party, or group. So it doesn't have to be like a tribe, like a Native American traditional tribe, which is basically a historical tribal community with shared culture, traditions, and survival needs. The modern tribes are contemporary groups united by shared interests, values, or affiliations. And then what I don't know if this is a real term. I might have made it up. It might be real. Positive tribalism is a group that fosters cooperation, support, and collective achievement. So I'm going to go into all of these. I'm going to start with the history as I usually do because I like to go in chronological order. And starting in about 2.5 million years ago, we were organized as human beings into tribes, the historical tribes that I mentioned. And only recently, about 0.5% of our history, have tribes shifted away from the historical definition of tribes. So, unfortunately, I would say that the way that tribalism has shifted in the modern era is mostly to humanity's detriment. There's not a lot of positive tribalism going around. There's a lot of in groups and out groups and exclusion, and us and them are bad and us are good. Sorry for my improper English. And I think that it's time for a little update and a reset. Like I do in a lot of cases, I'm going to try to innovate a little bit in this area and say there is a way to make tribalism good and leverage our heritage in a way that's positive, which is positive tribalism, but I'll go into it in more detail about what I mean by that, and I'll try to lay out how I think we should use tribalism. So let's talk about why tribalism evolved. It was kin selection and reciprocity, basically favoring your group, because if you have a group of people you can rely on and you have a core team to help survive, if you break a leg, you can be cared for by those around you, and great, you can survive much more easily than if you don't have a group of people where there's reciprocal help. The other thing is there's a number called Dunbar's number, which says that the cognitive limit on stable social relationship is about 150, which is where historical tribes kind of maxed out most of the time. Now, protection and shared resources, basically enabling people to share the results of their labor and defend from out tribes was important. And if a tribe had lots of food and not a lot of weapons, another tribe could invade them and take over their food and kill them all. And, you get the idea. You kind of have to have a balance of defensiveness and offensiveness and productivity from a food and shelter perspective. Now, there's also language, rituals, and norms that spread within tribes, which is natural as a group of people spends most of their time together, which creates shared experience and group collaboration and cohesion. So let's talk about what tribalism looked like. It was within the tribe, egalitarian. Across tribes, it was intertribe was often based on might makes right. It was, there was certainly some cooperation between tribes, but there was more of there was a clear in group which was within the tribe and an out group which was outside the tribe where there was less trust. Sometimes there was collaboration between tribes, but a lot of the times it was a might makes right sort of mentality, and certainly that was the final law was might makes right because there were no laws governing across tribes during that history. So that created a very us versus them mentality, which I think is in truth ingrained into us to a certain degree. Loyalty to the tribe was more important than individual autonomy and individual rights. And there was sort of a uh, shared culture within the tribes. Now let's talk about post historical tribalism, where tribalism has been reorganized but not eliminated. The modern version of tribalism is based on political factions, nationalism, online subcultures, religious communities, sports teams, fandoms, brands, and these are all kind of pseudo tribes. They sort of mimic the in-group, out-group. When we talked about the definition, it's just that we have a shared sense of social cohesion. And there is, a sense of hostility to outsiders, even within these pseudo tribes, right? Now, sports teams, they make a joke of it, right? But then they also do favor people in their with their favorite sports teams, right? So there is a sense of in-group and out-group there. At least I've gotten the sense that people do that. You can tell me in the Q&A if you don't think that's true, but that's been the general sense that I've gotten, although I'm not a big sports guy, so I wouldn't have the most inside intel on that. So, um, that said, I will talk about what I call toxic tribalism, which is the problem, which is that the tribes don't really unify people in meaningful, inclusive ways. Someone in the social said, well, the tribes have common values. Well, they don't. Like just because you have the same sports team in common with someone, that doesn't mean you have common values. Even if you take political parties, often the political parties are you know, they're dividing us up amongst things that are, not really impacting our day-to-day lives very much, or they're based on misunderstandings of things rather than the actual things themselves. And we've talked about those two in a lot of other events. And so I think the tribes that tribalism has converted into in modern times, and maybe this is where Emma was going, is that it's sort of, there's a little bit left of the historical tribes that we used to live in, but not much. There are very few people on Earth that still live in those historical tribes, but there are probably in like the Amazon forest and the Aborigines and stuff like that. But for the most part, these modern tribes really do more division amongst people that don't live there, that do interact on a regular basis. We interact with people with different political backgrounds, different races, different religious backgrounds, and yet all these things are tribes that are often dividing us. Um, there are, by the way, some religious leaders that try hard to talk about unity and not create this in and out group and animosity between religions. And then there are other religious leaders that, exacerbate or make those divisions more clear. So I think it's important to follow the ones that are unifying rather than the ones that are divisive in general across all types of tribes. And if I would argue that if we want to survive another 100 years as humanity without a mass human extinction event, we really have to rethink the way that tribalism takes shape because the amount of power getting into the hands of more and more people that are focusing on, violent, nationalism, basically saying, you're with us or you're against us, and if you're against us, you're going to be punished and penalized in many, many ways. That's on the upswing. Authoritarianism is on the upswing, and unless we want our fates to be in the hands of, 150 people who are going to have their tribe at the top, right? We probably should do something about that before it gets to be too late. So I would argue that, even as citizens in our country, we have more in common with citizens of other countries than we have to disagree about. Like most people around the world, and I've met many, many people from all over the world, and I would argue we all have more in common as human beings than we have to divide us. But people love to divide and conquer. That's right out of Machiavelli's The Prince. You divide people up and then you separate them so they're disempowered, and then you rule over them and control them because you are the person with the power. And that's what our politicians have learned from. It's part of every political scientist reading, mandatory reading in a college curriculum to read Machiavelli's The Prince. And probably now the 48 Laws of Power is included in that. That's kind of the modern version of Machiavelli's The Prince by Robert Greene. Um, which are both good reads, just so you can understand how other people are operating, by the way. So we do have differences, skin color, religions, customs, etc. But I think our values, and I'm going to talk about what I think are common values later on in what I would call what I think is an ideal tribe. So let's talk a little bit more about the solution, which is what's missing is a tribe that's agreeable to all reasonable people. And if you have an in-group that is inclusive of all reasonable people, then that's a tribe that makes tribalism not only feel good, which it does today, to feel like my tribe is good and the other tribes are bad. That kind of makes us innately feel good because we have 2.5 million years of conditioning for it to feel good. But it actually helps us do good not only for the members of the tribe, but for all of humanity if our tribe actually cares about all of humanity. And I'll argue that it should if it's a good tribe. And basically, the only people excluded from the tribe would be unreasonable people whom I don't think should be, guiding the direction of society and helping write our laws. We don't want unreasonable people to write laws, or we're going to be held to unreasonable conditions, and that's not a good place to be, right? I would say the vast majority of people are reasonable, but many reasonable people also have misunderstandings, and that's where we have so much division, is based not on who's reasonable and who's not, but on who has more misunderstandings about which topic. Um, ultimately, I think that the people that are excluded should still be treated politely, protected from harm, and made to feel welcome if they want to use their innate ability to reason more and to be reasonable. So how do we ensure that? What's missing to accomplish that, right? So I'm trying to lay out a theoretical solution here. It kind of goes a little bit along with, for those that are philosophy buffs, Kant's categorical imperative. If you can come up with a series of rules that should apply to every person universally, but even Kant couldn't come up with that because he said that being honest was one, and in the famous example of if an axe murderer comes to your house and asks where your children are hiding, Kant said, yes, you should be honest and tell them, but we all innately know that's not the right answer, right? You don't tell an axe murderer at your door where your children are hiding. You say you don't have children and move on. Um, so let's talk about what's missing is that set of rules that all reasonable people would agree with that guide people's actions and create core values of an inclusive tribe. If you think that's impossible, give me a couple more slides. I'm going to try to convince you that it's not only possible, but you have it and that you're in the right place because you're a part of a community that has those values. So I'm going to talk about what we call the five intentions, which are five rules in priority order that I'd argue we should all be trying to follow at all times. They're the uniting values of the Free Thinker Institute, and I'm going to go through them one at a time here. So, first intention is to always be polite while having a devotion to using reason and intuition to be the best version of yourself, seek truth, and to be fair. So, this requires a personal devotion to self-discovery, self-improvement, physical, intellectual, philosophical, emotional, and spiritual. And I would argue we all want to be treated politely, so why not treat others politely? And that would encourage other people to treat us politely in turn. And I would argue that we all have an innate desire to seek truth. Now, half of the country says the other half's watching fake news. That half says the first half's watching fake news. But what I'll bet you is that if you ask anyone, including the people you think that are watching fake news, is it important to seek truth? They will all say yes. And I think we all have an innate desire to seek truth. It's just which truth is more likely to be true than not that we disagree on. and we'll get to the other aspects of the five intentions that I think will actually, with time, help us resolve those differences about which side is really fake news. And I'm not going to be able to answer that question tonight. I'm not going to even try. Um, but if you've come to other events, you probably know where I stand anyway. I'm not so guarded about it. Um, but what I think is important is that we have people that agree with me and that disagree with me as part of this community, because that's what will help us be a diverse community. And I think there's a lot of strength in diversity as long as we have some common ground rules. And these ones that I'm going through here are the common ground rules of the Freethinker Institute. So intention two, be transparent about who you are and what you believe to the extent that you trust someone, meaning share your opinions about what you like and what you don't like, about what you think and what you think is true, what you think is false, but also at the same time and with equal priority, have an open mind towards new ideas that will help you achieve the first intention, to be polite, be the best version of yourself, to seek truth and to be fair. And where someone can point out a way you can do those things better, keep an open mind that they can help you and that it is helpful when they do. Now, this basically lets you share your own ideas so that they can be criticized. It'll help you keep an open mind so that if you're not accurate about something, you'll get a more accurate impression and you'll be able to change direction and become more aligned with truth and fairness.
From
Next, someone's not on mute.
Good morning. You say, don't look back in anger, Oasis. Favorite lyrics too.
Okay. So I forgot to make a couple of other people co-presenters. So let me do that. And now I have the full screen up so that I can see. So bear with me. The Zoom bombers are out hard tonight because this is a political topic. They always come for the political topics. So this shouldn't be a political topic, to be quite frank, because I don't think that anything that we're talking about so far is super political other than the bill, but that wasn't even on the agenda. So that was a last minute addition. So next, I think you know, an openness and not even just an openness, but an eagerness to get to know other people at a deep and profound level, which is what I was referring to earlier as listening to understand where they're coming from, and sharing your thoughts about how they can be their best selves, seek truth, and be fair, while having them do the same for you. Doesn't that sound like a great way to like exchange ideas on equal footing with other people with different ideas? And you know what? You don't have to agree with anyone. All you have to do is keep an open mind that they might be right. And I forget, I think it was Aristotle. I'm going to paraphrase the quote because my memory's not the best. Something about the sign of a mature mind is to be able to listen to and understand a truth without necessarily agreeing to it. And someone can put that actual quote in the chat. I see Carrie is probably eager to. He's smiling. So, so I probably got something wrong about it, and that's okay. Someone will correct it. That's the beauty of a community where we all seek truth, is that we don't mind being corrected, right? That's part of the important part, is that if you're too upset when someone corrects you and they're right, you have to worry about egotism, right? That's a sign of egotism when you can openly let other people correct you and you actually appreciate it. There's a great Buddhist quote that says, and I think I'll get this one right, treat a trusted friend who points out your flaws as if they've revealed a cache of hidden treasure. And that's really the sign of growth, and that's what the second intention is about. Now, the third intention is the first and second intentions are about. Now, the third is actually really important, probably one of the most important ones, and that's the ability to improve your critical thinking skills. And that's when I say critical thinking, I mean the ability to distinguish between fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. And so when we say fact versus fiction, we're talking about objective reality and what's actually going on in the world that we live in. And then when I say wisdom versus folly, I'm talking about making good decisions versus bad decisions. And in the next intention, I'm going to go into very clear detail about what I mean by good and bad. So, and I do have an objective, I think, well grounded in positive psychology definition. So here we want to learn to gather evidence from both biased and unbiased sources, noting the context of where they're from, and trying to keep in mind that a biased source is going to say the things that feed their confirmation bias. And then also to evaluate evidence using logic and reason to try to come to grounded conclusions about what's a better decision or what's a more likely to be true scenario given multiple possibilities. Now, we also want to be willing to question our current beliefs, like I said, and to question other people's beliefs. And isn't it great to be in a community? And for those that have been a part of the FTI, some of you for years, you know that what we're about is growing together, right? And it's so much fun to be a part of a community where I can feel like Carrie and I have different political views, right? But we listen to each other with an open mind. And we may not always change our mind, but we always at least give the other person the benefit of the doubt that their intentions are good and hear them out with an open mind. And I appreciate that about Kerry and about other members of the FTI that also have different political views. And I'm generally centrist, but I lean more on one side than the other, which you probably gleaned from the points about Trump's bill. So um, that said, being a part of that kind of community helps us all grow and learn more. And so that's where I think that it's an agreeable value. And what I'm positing here is that these five intentions are things that all reasonable people would agree with. So if someone disagrees with that, write down your reason for disagreeing. And I have changed them based on people's reasons. So, they're not dogma, right? They themselves are malleable. We just want to turn them as a group into something that is agreeable by all reasonable people and adds value to each one of our lives and also the lives of the people we can influence. And that gets to the fourth intention, which is a little bit more involved than the first three, because it comes in two steps, two priorities. So the first priority is that we should always minimize significant unnecessary harm from happening to anyone, full stop, and we should empower others that do the same. We should prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to all human beings, period, whenever we can influence it. You know, and we basically are trying to minimize significant unnecessary harm in totality. Next is once we've done that, we want to attempt to maximize flourishing or happiness while minimizing harm, and basically we want to treat others the way that they want to be treated as long as there's no good reason not to, which is my modification to the platinum rule. The platinum rule says to treat other people the way they want to be treated. But if I treat other people the way they want to be treated and someone walks up to me and says, all right, I want you to give me all your net worth and sell all your assets and give me all the money. Well, I have a good reason not to do that, right? So you have to give a caveat to the platinum rule, which is treat other people the way they want to be treated, get to know them, understand who they are and how they work, treat them that way unless there's a good reason not to. Because we all want to be treated that way by definition. So why not do the same for others and then they'll do the same for us? So let's do a few definitions here. By happiness, I mean, by happiness and even flourishing, what I really mean is the satisfaction we get from achieving whatever goal one sets for oneself in pursuit of those goals, as well, including both the pursuit of those goals as well as the feeling of accomplishment when we achieve the goals. I like the Buddhist quote, which is, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." I think we should be enjoying the path to achieving our goals more than being like relying on the excitement from achieving the goals, because otherwise it's very demotivating once the goal is achieved and then it's like, well, what's next? So much better to enjoy the path. So by harm, I mean a person defining themselves as having been harmed through action or inaction of a sentient being, which means significant harm has to be independently validated by where significant harm has to be independently validated by third parties. For example, if you took a jury of carefully selected peers and they were to say, all right, that harm is significant and should be punished by the law, that defines significant. Now, I'm not saying that that's what the law does today. It's not exactly what the law does today, but it's actually pretty aligned with a lot of the law. And Carrie's the lawyer, I'm not. So you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure most laws would align with that, especially criminal laws, which are the ones that put you in jail. Um, Now, the next thing is a necessary harm is a harm that prevents a greater harm. So if I see a person shooting school children and I have a gun, I'm going to shoot that person, right? And I'm causing harm, and it's significant harm. But you know what? It was necessary because I'm preventing the greater harm of him shooting school children. So there are necessary harms, and this is where I part ways with some quotes in Stoicism, and Hippocrates said, "Do no harm." Some quotes from Stoicism say, "Do no harm." I say, do no unnecessary harm." So necessary harms are okay, but they should be a very rare occurrence. And that said, next is that I think that we should have as much freedom to pursue happiness as like as we can, as long as we're not causing significant unnecessary harm. We should be able to try to achieve our goals and also minimize harm for non-significant harm for ourselves and others. And I would argue we should all be trying to do that. And basically, I've come up with a term called NPP, which is net present positivity, which is if you take all of the positive events in your life and all of the negative events in your life that will result from a decision, and you take your whole life and the positivity and the negativity, and you have some conversion ratio where a certain amount of negativity is okay for a certain amount of positivity, some conversion, then you can kind of quantify how much, what I call net present positivity, which is the amount of positive experience that you achieve in your life will be done. And then you can also say, well, how does the net present positivity get changed for all the people I can influence? And that whole thing is called TNPP, which is total net present positivity. And I'd argue that's the function that we should be maximizing is the amount of happiness that is experienced and the reduction in harm that's experienced by all the people we can influence with our decisions. If it sounds overwhelming, it is. You don't have to think about it when you're deciding whether or not to offer someone a cup of tea. But if you're in an important decision, it might be worth thinking about how does it affect the happiness and harm that people that you're going to influence by that decision are going to experience. So whenever you're like unsure about a decision, I think this is a good paradigm to think about it with, to try to make the best decision for everybody that you can influence. Um, It also, by the way, this two-step process kind of moves the conversation of utilitarianism forward and addresses some of the criticisms of utilitarianism for the philosophy geeks out there. And if you didn't see how, we can talk about any criticisms that you think are still valid on this, that you think are valid of utilitarianism as well. And I can make the distinction for you from my perspective, and maybe you'll prove me wrong, and I'm fine with that. I'll always keep an open mind too. So, um, next is the fifth intention, which is we all want to be loved, so why not put more love into the world, both platonic, which means friend-based love. More often, we have friend-based love for others, as well as romantic, though, because we should also love our significant, whoever our partners are. And I would argue that we should at least do that for other human beings, and ideally, actually, towards all sentient beings. I would also argue that we should not just give, but and not just learn to give love, but also to receive love. And some people are good at one or the other and not both. But we should also be good at reciprocating love, not in a transactional way, but in a, this person cares about me, and so I'm going to do what I can to make that person feel better and, express that I care about them more openly and honestly. And I think that, the reason this is fifth is not because it's the least important. It's because if you don't follow the first four, you could actually end up loving someone who's very harmful to yourself or others. And so I think actually the reason love comes last is not because it's the least powerful, it can be the most transformative, but because the other four help you aim that love towards the people that make the most sense to spend your time loving or reciprocating love on, or giving love or receiving love from. So, and you will sort of innately already start number five with number four by increasing TNPP. So that said, suppose that I was right. Will that end all conflict on Earth and make everybody a happy human being magically and immediately? No, no, it won't. So even if I'm right about all that, there's still a long way to go, right? Because first of all, there's only a small number of people that have ever heard of the five intentions, so no one's following these. So even if they're actually right and useful, they're not actually that useful until because right now the different tribes are actually sowing discord. And what I'd like to do is try to create a tribe that is so agreeable to reasonable people that reasonable people jump at the chance to be a part of it, and because we all want to do good in the world and we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves and are and be focused on something that's aiming to do good in the world. And I would argue that creating a tribe of these five intentions does just that. Now, if we make that tribe big enough and we get enough momentum around positivity and what I call positive tribalism, then we can actually transform the world into a much better place. If you think about all the things you don't like about the world and you ask yourself, if the people causing that problem that you don't like were following these five intentions, would they still be doing that? I would challenge you to think about that. Think about the thing that upsets you the most and say, if all the people who could influence that thing were following these five intentions, would they really be causing that problem? And I would be willing to bet that no, they wouldn't. And if anyone wants to challenge me in the Q&A, definitely feel free to do that. Um, that's what free thinking is all about. So next, I'm going to say a quick, oh, I forgot. I'm going to pull up a one-page graphic. So I have a graphic of these five intentions. And so the goals, the North Stars are be polite, be your best self, seek truth, and be fair. And then there's a circle of thought, which is transparently share your beliefs with other people, listen to an open mind to those other people to try to get closer to these North Stars. Hone your critical thinking skills so you can better reject false beliefs and better accept more true beliefs so that your current beliefs become more well-founded and on more solid ground so that you're getting closer to being polite, seeking, being your best self, seeking truth and being fair. And then that circle is a virtuous circle that keeps going, and your thoughts improve over time as you keep following these. And then it goes into from thoughts to actions, where we prevent significant unnecessary harm, increase happiness, and decrease harm, and then ultimately express, accept, and reciprocate love. So this is the graphic. I'm going to share the slides for tonight's slideshow, and we can that way people will have the link to that graphic if you want it, and then and also to all the side notes. Next, I basically would say that if we have a tribe like this, like the Freethinker Institute, we can actually accomplish a lot. And we actually have five pretty ambitious goals in the FTI. The first of which is to promote the awareness and usage of the five intentions to try to help make the world a better place through sharing good philosophy. Um, the rest of the five ambitious goals probably won't be achieved unless we can achieve the first. The second is to increase positive relationships. There's a dearth of friendships in the world globally. And I want to help people, we want to help people build more positive, meaningful relationships because in a world short on friendship, connection is basically like a form of healing salve. And so we need to, and actually studies show that loneliness is actually more harmful to the health than smoking. So the dearth of friendships is killing people literally. It's killing them earlier and it's reducing the quality of life of people as they get older. Really important to increase positive relationships. I also want to unite the very divided world we live in. Like I said, I don't think the divisions are along real lines. I think they're basically often based on misunderstanding, and I think there's a lot of cultivating of, misunderstanding. Considering that about half of America thinks the other half is watching fake news and that half thinks the first half is watching fake news, they can't both be right, right? So there's and I'm not saying that one is always right or has exclusivity on the truth, but I can say that there are definitely misunderstandings along the way with some of the people, probably on both sides. Maybe not in equal quantities, but certainly both sides need to have an open mind to listening to the other in order to bridge that divide. So this is where asking, listening to understand comes in rather than saying you're wrong, this is right, and this is I'm right, and this is why, which I call the logic hammer, which is how most of us normally deal with conflict, is the logic hammer. And it's what I used to do too, so I get it. But it's not the best way of dealing with differences of opinions. Next is to promote win-win relationships. I really think that relationships should be based on mutual benefit, where we're both mutual benefit and mutual respect, where people are not winning at another's expense. It's not a zero-sum game. We don't have to put other people down to get ahead. We can create win-win relationships where we all win together. And as I believe it was JFK that said, the rising tide lifts all boats. And I agree with that. And next is to create financial prosperity. This is perhaps our most ambitious goal, and that's why it's last, because it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But I want to start an organization that will someday accomplish this. It's a world where every single human being on Earth has the opportunity and means to achieve a quality of life equivalent to earning $100,000 a year in USD and what's called purchasing power parity, which means that in the US, if you had $100,000 in the average, area, right, you need more than that in New York City and less of it in very rural areas. But the amount of goods you can buy in terms of food, shelter, clothing, medicine, all that stuff is the equivalent of making $100,000 a year, which is basically where more money has very little impact on your happiness. At that point, only good philosophy does. And we do try to help with that too, as you can tell. Philosophy is really largely what we're focused around rather than the financial prosperity right now. But we have done things to try to help people get to that six-figure salary. And we've gotten dozens of people into jobs that make that and dozens of more trained to be under jobs that we haven't been able to track. So um, basically, what have we accomplished? I just talked about some of that. We have a curriculum for members of the Freethinker Institute. And speaking of which, I should share in the chat the more information, how to learn more information about the FTI for those interested. Um, and that is in the chat for anyone interested in learning more about, let me say, learn more about the FTI. And and you can also learn more about being a member. And in that membership, we have a curriculum that helps people be more effective at building and maintaining relationships, achieving goals, and a wide variety of other things. And we've helped our members join our tribe and be create a new friend group. And probably in the Q&A portion, we can have some of the members talk about their experience in the group. But so far, it's been very, very positive feedback about creating a new friend circle that is a useful peer mentoring group. And we also talk about how the five intentions help us. Not all the time. We're not hammering on it all the time, but we do talk about it and we do leverage it as wisdom to put into our daily operations, daily lives. Lastly, we've created an educational presentation discussion events like this one for about 4 years now. Hopefully these have been useful. I've always gotten lots of good feedback, not only for my presentations, but for other people's as well. So next is the future possible ideas. I think it would be nice to think about, and we've had some internal conversations about trying to think about things that could cause that end of humanity and mass extinction event, and how do we prevent that from happening? Combating misinformation and disinformation, because I agree, I think that we would all agree that we should find the real truth. How do we get better at knowing what is the real truth, given that there's so much disagreement about it today? And I'm not coming at this from an ideological left or right wing perspective, but more from a centrist, let's all get better at finding truth together perspective. I also think that it's important to help people learn what their dream job is and get a valuable skill set in doing it. We did an event on AI where I showed people how to do just that using ChatGPT. You can literally do all of that just with ChatGPT. It's pretty amazing. Um, you can also create or join what we call a pod in membership. We're grouped into small groups, but they can become larger groups that are focused on achieving some sort of goal of mutual interest. And we've got interest in an entrepreneurship pod, which I'm going to be creating soon. And that will be a group of entrepreneurs for peer mentoring and coaching. Normally, you pay a lot of money to be a part of something like that. With the FTI, there is no cost for membership. And in fact, if I make the money that I hope to commercially, there will actually be a way to make money as a member of the FTI by achieving goals, adopting good habits, and working towards mutually agreed upon goals. So that is hopefully coming in the next year or two. We'll see how I do commercially. So next week's event is about understanding neurodivergence. The link to the event is in the chat just in a second. It basically talks about how people who are not neurodivergent, which are called neurotypicals, which is the majority of us, can better interact with neurodivergence by understanding how they work. And so some of you may have heard reference to what I believe is a good guiding principle in my life, which is the platinum rule. And so I would argue that we should understand how neurodivergents work and treat them the way they want to be treated so that we can interact with them in a more positive way because it can get tense if you don't understand that someone is neurodivergent. And if you know the signs to look out for and then realize that you can adjust your behavior for that person because they don't think the way that neurotypicals do, that can be a useful way of interacting better with neurodivergence. And turn them into allies instead of enemies. It's easy to turn a neurodivergent into an enemy if you don't understand them and you think that they're neurotypical because they just act differently. But you can get along with neurodivergence. You just have to understand how they work and what makes them tick and how to interact with them more effectively. So next is my summary is that the right tribe is the FTI tribe. We don't exclude anyone other than people who are not reasonable. And even people who are not reasonable, we care about. And we're not causing any harm to anyone. We're helping everybody that we can to the extent that we can influence them. Although I can say that when someone is unreasonable, it can be much harder to influence them in a positive way. And unfortunately, that's a lesson people have to decide whether or not they want to keep open-minded to outside help. And I would argue that if you agree that these are reasonable intentions to follow, then your right tribe is probably the FTI. And we would welcome you as a part of our tribe. And I think that doing that will help us all be better at positively influencing the people that we can influence the most. And that, by the way, the idea that we would prioritize the people we can influence the most, the reason for that is, well, we can have the biggest impact there, right? If you think about, there's a famous essay written by Peter Singer in the philosophy world called On Famine and a couple of other things. And he makes a good argument that we should help everybody eat with equal fervor, but I would argue that's actually not quite the case. He makes kind of a an interesting argument for those that are interested in that topic. But I think that it makes more sense to and is more intuitive that we should help the people we can influence the most because we can have the greatest impact on their lives. Now, that doesn't mean harm others to help those we can influence the most, because when you're harming someone, you can influence them, right? So, that those people count too, and so it's not saying to do bad behavior in order to help your closest buddies. It says that should have a positive impact on everyone where possible, which is preventing significant unnecessary harm and increasing happiness and decreasing harm. So, within our tribe, we always remain polite and we can agree to disagree, as I talked about. And the only time that we need to agree actually is if the topic influences something that we have a high influence over and will affect both of our lives or the other person's life, and the discussion is a disagreement about something that will influence that decision. So those cases, we should probably come to some sort of agreement if at all possible. But at the end of the day, it's okay to agree to disagree with people. What matters is, have you heard their perspective well enough that you can reiterate it back to them in a way that they go, wow, that you really understand my perspective. And I would argue most of us, for the people we disagree with the most, we can't do that. I still can't do that with some people in my life, some of whom just don't want to talk about it anymore because like it's a political topic and some people don't like to talk about politics. But I think it's important to try to understand others. So that said, we're going to go to the Q&A. So feel free to, I'm going to give a quick caveat for the Q&A portion of the evening and how we cover that. And so when you raise your hand, we're going to go in the order people raise their hand. When you raise your hand, limit your comments or questions to one comment or question at a time, unless there are no other hands up, and then limit the length of that comment or question to 2 to 3 minutes. If you want to respond to what someone just said, always feel free to just jump in and make a 20-second or less comment or question on what that person said. And that way we can have conversation even amongst a large group that goes back and forth with quick comments. But then after those comments die down, we'll go to the next hand up. So that said, I'm curious what people thought. I made some bold claims here. There must be some hands up. DLJ usually likes to disagree with me. Where are you, DLJ?
Ah, well, I've been called upon. Yeah, looking forward to next week already, given my 7 years I've been working on the reverse of that, which is trying to help us far superior neurodivergent people to understand you weird normies.
There you go.
I'm reversing the question on that one, obviously. So that'd be interesting to see how that gels. Putting the two together could be very strong. Yeah.
It's not
Anyway.
me. It's not me presenting that, by the way. It's a
Oh,
neurodivergent. So far as I know, I'm not one, but yeah, it's not going to be me presenting that. But I would love for you to come and share your thoughts.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on this one then. Okay, the bit obviously, as you mentioned, how many million years? The easiest way to unite a tribe is to have a common enemy. So if
Yep.
we are one global tribe, who's the enemy then? Martians? Who are we
I'm not
gonna?
taking the easy path, DLJ. I'm taking the
No,
harder
no,
path, and the
I
harder
know.
path
I'm
is
just
to unite people through peace and through
yeah,
unity rather than making a common enemy. So I'm trying not to make a common enemy.
yeah.
In fact, if I make an enemy, it's the
I know.
unreasonable people.
I
I'm
was going
sorry,
to
go
say
ahead.
that. I
Yeah,
was going to say that.
yeah.
Yeah. What was my point?
Oh, I'm
We've done
sorry.
it.
I'm sorry, DLJ.
Oh, yeah, right. So we've got different means of thinking and modes of thinking. So some people are more emotional, some people are more analytical. Some people are going to easily buy into the ideas of this because it kind of just makes sense, right? So yes, there you go, you got my agreement. But others are going to be much more emotional thinkers, right? In other words, like I don't like these different skin color people moving into my. They're not thinking in your terms, right?
Right.
So how do you get those on board and yeah. So hence common enemy is essentially what
Yeah.
politicians have been using for a long time, demonize the other, and therefore we can invade them and no one's going to mind, right? That's we've seen that in certainly US politics for the last 50 odd years or more, right? So all right, how do you hit everybody? Because everybody's going to be in your ecosystem. There's the question.
Yeah, so great question. We want people that are making decisions emotionally. I would argue that if they're calm and polite and that people are treating them politely, that they won't be emotionally hijacked. The reason most people are emotional is because someone gets impolite, makes an attack or something like that, and then suddenly the response is emotional. And that's called an emotional hijacking. And you can also have a fight or flight hijacking of the emotional decisions. And what we want to do by staying polite all the time is keeping people in the logical portion of the brain. We want diversity. We want people who may not, who the five intentions agree with, but that all have very different opinions. I don't mind if someone is racist, if they're anti-Semitic, like that's fine. We want to talk with those people and understand why they have those beliefs. We want to understand it, right? And by understanding it, if we ask thoughtful questions that make them question their own beliefs, well, maybe they have a misunderstanding. If they ask questions that make us question our beliefs, maybe we have a misunderstanding. Although in those two examples, I don't think it's us that would have the misunderstanding, but that's just my guess. I'll always keep an open mind, right? Someone may come in with a really good argument of something that surprises me. But so that's kind of the answer to your question. The only
And
out
I
group, go ahead.
sorry, yeah, if I'm allowed time so to
Yeah.
come back on that, you're going to have to dismantle a lot of existing infrastructure in terms of um, media that is designed to push people apart, institutions that are set up to protect one smaller ecosystem versus larger. That's ingrained and embedded for how many hundreds of years?
Yep.
Uh, to yes, on the positive side, but how do you change the yeah? They well, what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I like to say the easy things usually aren't the ones worth going after. So I'm going after a really hard thing here, and I can't do it alone. That's why I need all of you to say, hey, if these five intentions sound reasonable, please join us. Like, be a part of this. Let's make it happen. If everyone on this group invites one more person or invites 10 more people and that happens 5 times, we would be covering the whole world. So, it's a doable thing. We all know roughly 150 people, probably by name, that's Dunbar's number. So to get 10 of them to actually be able to communicate the 5 intentions to, it's not an unreasonable ask. Now, am I saying that that's going to happen in my lifetime? Probably not. But would I like it to? I would love that to happen. And we do need to dismantle a lot, hundreds of years, but we do have 2.5 million years on our side where tribalism was mostly about unity and protection. If we just make that unity and protection what Ginny said, which is the unity and protection of human beings, we're in a point where, having this divisions is going to end humanity. We're going to have a mass human extinction event if we don't start unifying. So it's critical. We have to. So thank you, DLJ. If you don't have anything else, I want to go to Mike.
I do, but there's Q, so I'll come back. Thanks.
Okay, just yeah, put your hand up if you don't mind. Thanks. Mike, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'll probably take a lot less than 3 minutes, but I'll probably jump back in the queue at some point. But I think that it's worth mentioning something called the naturalistic fallacy,
Hmm.
and it's kind of a confusion of is and ought. And the notion is that because something is, that is the way it ought to be. It comes up a lot when you're talking about evolutionary pressures, things like that. You can argue that we're wired by evolution to do a lot of really bad things, but that doesn't mean we ought to do them.
Correct.
And we do not have to say. I don't think it's sufficient to say. Uh, it's not a slam dunk to say, well, we're wired by nature to be that way, so that's the way we have to be. I just don't buy it. Another thing that's kind of interesting, I'll just throw this out, but then I'll stop and entertain questions, or you can move on. Uh, uh, we're competitive. That's one thing. We have this notion that we're bringing up of tribalism. I'm going to maintain that competitiveness does not necessarily require tribalism. That is, people can be competitive, for example, within a tribe. But that doesn't mean that people have to join tribalism, join tribes, and work to destroy each other, which is counterproductive and kind of a lose-lose game a lot more than people think it is. So competitiveness, sure. Tribalism, not necessary. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah, and I don't think I made the argument that tribalism is necessary, and I don't necessarily think it is. And I think if
No,
we
not you.
okay,
I'm anticipating other people.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think I'm one of those people that I don't think commits the naturalistic fallacy very often because, I'm always thinking about what ought to be regardless of what is, right? And that's where like, this whole idea that tribalism can be used for good rather than for dividing people. Right
Yeah.
now tribalism is used to divide people. And all I'm saying is if we think about it a different way, I mean, and that's my job, right? Like Carrie's laughing, but my job as an inventor, I have to come up with stuff that no one's come up with before. Otherwise, I don't
Yeah.
have a job, right? So that's, I just invent in philosophy just like I do in software.
I should have said earlier. Let me be super clear. I agree with about 95% of what you said,
Got it.
Garrett. And I actually was not responding to you. I was
Okay.
anticipating what people who disagree with me
Got
might
it.
say. Like they
Got it.
might say things like, "Well, that's the way it is with human beings," or they might
Right.
say things like, "Well, how will the human being? How will people advance? How will we?"
Yes.
Live if we're not competitive? How will natural selection work? Things like that. So
Yeah.
it's not, but not you. I agree with
Yeah.
most of what you said. Okay, I'll
Yeah.
stop.
No problem. Thanks. Thanks, Mike. And I appreciate those comments. And I don't mind if you disagree with me, by the way. I was just trying to adjust
Oh
what
yeah,
was a
I
disagreement.
will.
But I felt like we were aligned. So I'm glad you're saying that we were, because then I didn't misread. So
Yeah, yeah,
so
no, we
great.
are.
Cool. Carrie, go ahead.
Oh boy, there's a lot to discuss here, but I'm going
One
to
at
try.
a time, my friend. One
Yeah,
at
I
a
know.
time.
I'm working hard. So the words that first came to mind when you're talking about tribalism are nested hierarchies. And what I'm taking my take home from this is that this is not one thing. It's not like you're a member of a tribe. And for by way of example, think of high school, right? There's a whole lot of different tribes going on at different levels. You can be members of multiple tribes. There can be, the high school that you're in might be a tribe when your football team is playing against another one. However, there can be, the teachers might be one tribe, the administration might be another tribe. There might be the stoners that smoke out behind, where the dumpsters are. There might be the Hicks, the rockers, the skate people, all of this stuff, right? And some people cross between groups. Some people are influential. That you talked about unifying and divisive, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think these are things that happen dynamically in these groups as the context changes and the group is challenged, right? Because this is what we're doing. This is like the Ash conformity experiment done in a dynamic environment where there's not just one group, right? This is like crowd dynamics. There's no such thing as a crowd, really. It's just how we understand it because it's easier than understanding 10,000 individuals. But anyway, so I think that's something to be mindful of is like if we were going to take your experiment and create a socially positive high school, how would you do it? Because some of them are going to be working against you real hard. You know what I mean? So it's almost like you kind of have to hack the human species, the mentality a little bit to get people to come along with you. And I think that if as soon as people catch on, they will resist. I know I was resistant in high school. Oh, I was just such a pain in the ass. But anyway, I'll leave it
That's
there.
why I aim for college student and older to convince. No, I'm just teasing. So
Just give
high
up on
schoolers,
almost.
high schoolers have enough to deal with, man. Like, God, that's a hard time in life.
Isn't there a
Uh,
group somewhere that takes all the adolescents and just says, "You go, guys, go somewhere,
yeah,
Well,
come
there's a
back
give me
when
saying,
the
go to
high
your
school
room and don't
teachers.
come out till you're 25,
Yeah.
which every parent
So
knows.
So I actually agree with you, Carrie, and I don't know if you were trying to disagree with me, but all I
no,
would say is I think that the idea is if we have a unifying tribe that agrees with the five intentions across like the majority of humanity, even 55%, right? Which I think is low. Out of the people I've shared them with, it's much more popular than 55%. But if we got 55% to agree with them and follow them, we would have the majority, and then the people who are the unreasonable people that want to be, megalomaniac dictators, they're gonna have some trouble getting elected, right? Or they're gonna have some trouble getting their armies to follow them. And so, I would agree though that we would all be members of other types of tribes, right? And even if we all agreed with, or if the majority of us agreed with the five intentions and were members of the FTI, we would still have sub-tribes within us, and we should. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But we have a unifying set of values that unites us with those people so that if there's a conflict between two tribes, it doesn't end up in nuclear war.
yeah,
Cool. David.
Um, this is my first time here. Um, I'm used to going to the Thinkers Club and assume this was a lot like the Thinkers Club. It is a lot like the Thinkers Club, but and you explain what this group's about, but I also got the feeling, is there a political action component to this thing
No, as like so people are allowed within the organization to have their political beliefs, but there's no endorsing candidates or anything like that. I don't shy away from giving opinions, but nothing is like endorsed. There's no endorsement of political anything from the FTI. We're apolitical and we want people from right, left, center, radical right, radical left, everywhere. We want to attract people from all directions.
that that discussion about the big beautiful bill was to understand it, not to fight it?
No, that was what I understood from like an hour or two's of research, and I very clearly said I haven't understood it all, but the things that I understood didn't sound very good.
Yeah.
But I'm open that there might be some great parts to it. And but the parts that I've read about and researched in detail were, in my opinion, not good. But if you think they were good, we're welcome to discuss that too, because it was part of tonight's discussion. So
No, I felt like you brought it up because you had a political bent on it, and
no, I'm apolitical.
I'm used to moderators that are. Oh, you're. I
Yeah.
think I know what your politics are, but I'm sorry.
I don't vote party lines. So you've met me tonight and you can come to our other events and I definitely lean left, but I make decisions based on, a third party perspective. I'm not a member of a party. I want to make the best decision in any given situation for humanity in general. I guess I should say I have no political bias is what I'm trying to say.
I could tell you lean left. And the
Yeah.
Thinkers Club, I've been going for a year and a half. I couldn't tell you what the whether the moderator leans left or right.
Yeah, I think that not there in Dante's Inferno, there's a special circle of hell for people who don't make an opinion when there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And I don't believe in that kind of metaphysical hell, but I do agree that there's a great saying, which is if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So
I,
I
I
stand for
was
what I believe in.
I was hoping for neutrality. That anyway, but I'll move on. Thank.
Yeah, neutrality is good, and I will be neutral, but I will have opinions and I'll share them. But you can share your opinions too, and if I'm wrong and you prove me wrong, I'll agree with you. I have no reason not to.
I don't want to argue, but I
Yeah,
mean, you got to talk for 55 minutes, so it's anyway, it's
It's his group.
yeah, but we have a presentation. If you want to present, David, come to me offline. Send me an email and you can present on a topic. We
no,
love
I'm not.
having guest presenters.
Yeah, I was just looking for a neutral presentation. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a pain. I'm sorry.
It's
Go ahead.
okay. Ginny, go ahead.
I will have another Don Quixote dream. This is my dream. I wish there were about 5 million hosts like you out there who will have a meeting with this type of topic every day of the week. Wouldn't that help us move toward a better world? There
I
you
think
go.
if they were all held politely, I think that it would be a better world. And I think whether the host was left leaning, right leaning, etc., the moderation needs to be objective. The opinions, I think everyone should be allowed to have an opinion. So that's
But
my
I'm talking about a host, 5 million hosts like you, holding the kind of topics that you are presenting or for discussion.
yeah.
That's all I'm saying. It's a Don Quixote is kind of a dream.
Yeah,
That
no, I appreciate that, Jenny. And actually that's a great point. I think, as we grow the FTI, I think part of what we should do is have more people hosting on, topics that are commonly incendiary. And David, for your knowledge, like we've talked about abortion, we've talked about the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, like we've talked about very incendiary topics, but the conversation was all polite. We all shared opinions. We had differing opinions in the group, in the room and everybody got to say their part and we all got to explain why we thought what we thought. And I think that's why Jenny's saying that because she's a regular. And, it's important that everybody, including me, feel comfortable that we can voice our opinions. Now, that's why we have a Q and A for at least half of the event. Tonight I ran a little longer than usual. Sometimes I'm 20 minutes and other presenters sometimes have gone an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes. I started pulling the ring at an hour and 10 minutes, but usually we're almost always under an hour. So yeah. But thanks, Jenny and Sunny. Go ahead.
Thank you, Garrett. I was trying hard to find something I can disagree with you, Garrett. I'm sorry to disappoint you on that. Good presentation. Um, I know the other gentleman, I forget his name now, but he was talking about e- evolutionary impulse to do some stuff cannot be right? Something to that effect. Um, so on what basis will he decide on doing the right thing or suppressing the wrong thing? So that's one
And
question to him.
was
The other,
that Wait,
Hmm?
before you go on to a second one, Sunny, let's do one at a time because there's a couple of hands up, and I want to find out who you're referring to.
I
It
think it's Mike.
might
Mike,
have
I
been
think it was
Mike.
me.
I
yeah.
don't, yeah, that's what I thought. But Mike, can you rephrase what you meant? Because I don't think he paraphrased it correctly, if I understood you right.
What I'm saying is that evolution may have wired us to behave in particular ways. Like you can argue that evolution has wired us men to compete for sexual access to women, so we should rape women. But I don't think we have to do that. I don't think we have to behave that way. And I think the naturalistic fallacy is that we kind of have to do what evolution, quote unquote, wired us to do. But as to the question about, okay, there's background noise. But
Got it.
as to the question about how do we decide what we should do, I think that gets back to what Garrett was talking about when he said reasonable people. So we have a discussion, we decide what is reasonable. So
Yeah.
that's my short answer.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. But the other point is like tribe, you can be a part of a tribe by choice, but also you are part of a tribe by nature. Like someone else was talking about, people with different colored skin or nation, language. So they form different tribes, right? So that's why the importance of multiculturalism is huge, where you don't necessarily have to have a common enemy to be united. You need to be curious enough to see how others function as a different tribe, and have that relationships. So you have that harmony between tribes. So that's a very important factor by which you can have cross-tribal relationships. A person who's part of one tribe can have unique um, characteristics. Like even David was mentioning about the other uh, thinker club where the
Mhm.
person is neutral. Sometimes we feel like, they say, "Oh yeah, I'm not left leaning or I'm not right, I'm independent. I'm right in the middle, I'm independent." Then you have the term left leaning independent. Then you have left leaning, I mean right leaning independent. Nobody can be neutral. It's impossible. And so, Garrett, for you to express your truthful um, leanings towards the left is a much more better model than trying to come across neutral, but in actuality, you're not revealing your true identity. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. And I agree with you that we are sometimes born into tribes, but I don't think we always have to. And I think you would agree with this. We don't always have to opt into agreeing with that tribe all the time. I was born into being an American citizen. That's not a great example because I could choose to give up my citizenship and move somewhere else. But like, when we went into Iraq, I spoke out against my government, even though both the left and the right supported the war in Iraq. I was like, no, this doesn't make sense. We don't have good proof. We don't have good evidence. I watched Colin Powell's presentation and I said, no, this is nonsense. Like we had better evidence of in the Cuban Missile Crisis than we did in weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So there, I separated from my tribe, and I will always separate from any tribe that I like to say. Oh shoot, I'm gonna forget the um where basically the tribe that doesn't, seek truth and to be fair, that I'm going to part ways with that tribe, right? That isn't trying to be polite, our best self, seek truth and be fair. I'll part ways with that tribe because those things are more important to me than anything I was born into or anything that I, have opted into in my life. So,
Yes, yes. Some may think you were being unpatriotic when you
yes,
went separated
some
yourself, but
did.
actually, I think you were patriotic because you're truth telling. But
Exactly.
there'll be some people who will say, "Oh my goodness, you are fighting against your own country. That's being
Yes.
unpatriotic." But that's a limited view.
Yep.
A
And I was
larger
told
view
I was
is
siding with terrorists to say that it's a shame that there are innocent people dying in Gaza, right?
right, right.
And I said, I think it's horrible that Hamas attacked Israel. And I also think it was horrible that 10 times as many people got killed in the counteroffensive and that we had a whole nother event on that. I won't rehash that territory, but you know, I think there was a better solution, and unfortunately, it wasn't chosen. But anyway, I don't mean to digress on that. We had enough to we had enough to unpack tonight with the things that I already unpacked. So, Jenna, how are you? And thank you, Sunny, for your comments and your kind words. Jenna, go ahead.
Uh, Thanks for the presentation, Garrett.
You're welcome.
I find it really insightful. I have a question, though. If you think that tribalism correlates or similar to collectivism, which is a concept that is more or less the opposite of individualism. And the reason I ask that because there are several um, things as well in collectivism, which made me think that that there are probably some overlap, but I just not understanding yet where. So like some of the concept that I thought that made them correlate is the crab bucket mentality. You mentioned as well the nationalism earlier,
Yeah.
so which kind of made me think of patriotism and the face-saving culture within collectivist society, the concept of Schadenfreude and Janteloven, which is a Scandinavian social code for egalitarianism. Um, yeah, that's just my thoughts regarding the presentation. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you. I think, Jenna, you bring up a great topic, probably one that we need a whole separate event and I need to spend time doing research on to give a real, like, well thought through opinion. What I can say is that my gut says that neither collectivism or individualism are right. And here I'm going to go with the Buddhist path of what's called the middle road, which is it's got to be a balance of the two, right? We have to think about the collective interests of everybody and not make decisions that solely favor us as an individual, but we also can't forget about individual responsibility, individual decisions, individual interests and hopes and dreams. And I think we can find a way with the modern world that we live in to balance between those two in a way that ends up benefiting everybody more. And that's where I think the five intentions, when you look at the fourth intention and you say, prevent significant unnecessary harm. Well, that prevents serial murderers from killing people for fun, right? Well, you could say, well, that's collectivism, right? It's everyone saying we're agreeing on this collective decision. Yes, it is. It's called laws, and we have laws, and we have them for a reason. We don't want serial murders to run amok and not go to jail. So laws are important. But there's also the importance of being able to express ourselves individually, and that's where free speech is so important. And I think really I'm giving longer of an answer than I wanted to, but I think we should have a whole nother event on that. So yeah, that's my quick answer.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate the good question. Anna, how are you?
Okay, how are you? Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was great, and I sounds really idealistic to me, which I'm a big fan of. Um, but I had a question about so reasonability. Are we talking about reasonability or are we talking about values? Because to me, in order to accomplish something like this, we'd have no countries, like no separate countries at all, a moneyless society, no religions, like spirituality is fine, but no separated religions. And I would think like 80% vegan would be ideal too. So those are kind of more, I don't know, like is that are those values? Is it reasonability? Because like within the word reasonability, it's I guess subjective to some extent. Like those four bullet points to me sound reasonable and sound ideal, but they're kind of values too. So I wonder, like, in order to accomplish something like that, we'd need to like promote the same values over the course of a number of generations before we arrive at this, understanding among everyone that these are our values and we're just going to walk arm in arm. And but then even then, as Carrie said, like, when I think of high school, we had cliques, like we still are, even if we walk hand in hand and we have all these core values and we're all aligned, we're still gonna, I think, right? We're still gonna have um, different, not, different, what's the word? I can't think of it anyways. Um, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought. Maybe I'll come back to it.
Miniature tribes.
Not different tribes. I can't think of the word. Okay, I'll stop there.
That's
Thanks.
okay. Thanks for your question. I'm kind of curious why you think that the five intentions would imply that we can't have religion or money. Can you clarify that?
Well, I think, well, religion in itself is tribalism. There's different names for different religions, so that in itself is, I mean, it's
Yeah. So I wasn't
right.
saying that we shouldn't have other tribes other than this one, right? And we sort of talked about in the Q&A earlier that it's okay to have other tribes, but this is like a least common denominator. So if you take the example of slavery, 300 years ago, slavery was okay. It was acceptable in a large part of the world. Now slavery's been banned by every United Nations country, 100% of them. So we have a, if you want to call it, a very loose tribe of anti-slavery, right? We're all part of the anti-slavery tribe in every United Nations country. So slavery is now a common denominator. All I'm trying to do here is make that common denominator more substantial and more meaningful and more impactful in a way that positively influences most people's lives, not just the people who were enslaved in the past, when slavery was legal. Now, there are still, unfortunately, too many slaves, even though it's illegal. And that's because I think people don't have these common values. If people said, I'm not going to cause significant unnecessary harm from anyone to anyone, and that was a commonly agreed upon thing, anyone promoting modern slavery, which does still exist, even though it's illegal everywhere, would would probably not get away with it, because someone would find out and they would get reported and it would, go down a better path. Does that make
How
sense,
does
Adam?
that, yeah, how does that tie into religion though? I'm saying
Religion is just
religion
a
at the
subtribe.
core is,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
religion is just a subtribe, right? So you can have religion, like the five intentions don't disagree as far as I know with any religious beliefs or values. They're very aligned with religious beliefs and values. At least all the ones that I've explored fairly deeply, I haven't found any core beliefs of any religion that disagree with them. If you think there are, definitely raise your hand again and let's talk about them specifically.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Ari, go ahead.
First, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your presentation. I am a proud member of the FTI, and it's one of my tribes. And personally, I try to speak to people, not specifically about the FTI, one at a time, because usually people's attention span is very small. But it's something I'm very proud of, and thank you. Second, I want to bring up, it's essentially Mike's point, but I really want to do this to challenge you, Garrett, and your ideas here for the purpose of growing them stronger. That's usually when we grow, is when we're challenged. And it's this idea that Mike was saying that we don't want to get into the natural fallacy. And so I want to posit this with really growing what he's saying, which I don't think is disagreeing, is that essentially he's saying, if I could, it could, take my own language here, he's saying we shouldn't be slaves to our biology. At the same time, I would say that we can't ignore our biology. And specifically, I want to reference neuroscience here, that it's become quite evident from the way that humans develop a sense of self and identity, that conceptualization of self is formed through being a part of a group or groups in general. Identity requires groups. And there's a whole bunch of literature on this, but it's pretty much well understood. I'm happy to have any people challenge this or argue, but I'm just going to present that as a data, and it's a truth-oriented thing, and something along the lines of that we all seek truth is that all good decisions need to be based on data. And the data is out that groups are necessary for humans to have identity. Essentially, usually the primary one is family, then we scale up in lots of different ways. And the point that I'm making here is for my own personal group, which I would say is my faith that I think aligns well with FTI, is one of the twin imperatives of Judaism is that you should be true to your own faith while being a blessing to others, regardless of their faith, right? And so this is the idea that in nature, we don't have one group. It's the idea that unity of life, or that this FTI would be the unity that celebrates diversity, right? And that you form relationships in there, and that this again is not ignoring our biology. You can't just pretend we don't need groups. And if anyone who talked about this, more fully, it's like this is the experiment of the Enlightenmentism, that we could just have Kant's imperatives, like you're saying, and then after that, you had groups reemerge from nationalism, of nations, of gender, more so, of race, and then of class. If you want to look at the big guys like Marx and all these things, this is what naturally came. And essentially, those forms of group were really, really nasty. And so we can't ignore that groups are necessary, but at the same time, I think it's really important to cultivate the types of groups that lead to cooperation as opposed to domination.
Can I respond
That's it.
super
That's me.
quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for that input. That was very thoughtful, Ari. I studied brain science quite a bit, and I think that it is connectedness with other people that we are wired for. I don't think it's groups per se. So that is tribes per se. So I would invite you to distinguish between a sense
Sure.
of connectedness and a group.
Absolutely. I can make a very simple mathematical analogy that really hits it home here. We are wired to form interactions with other people, specifically relationships. Those are with specific people, not single serving relationships, but long-term, ideally lifelong relationships. Anytime we're going to have specific relationships with specific people, those groups automatically form, right? Groups is the natural product of having specific relationships with people, right? You and me and this group right here, we're a group. Now, and the identity is necessary for a lifelong sense of self. And so you almost basically said, you proved my point, because we're wired for social behavior, groups. There's no way around that.
I think then let's talk about the difference between groups and tribes. I think tribes are not based on what you and I are talking about. Tribes imply an in-group and an out-group, for example.
So
and that's not necessary to
innate...
what you were talking about. I think we're agreed, but
I think you
we're
guys
not
are
talking
agreeing.
about tribes.
And I think, Ari, I would agree with everything you said. I don't think we should be slaves to our biology, and I also don't think we should ignore our biology. And I think Mike would agree with both of those things. He's not.
Absolutely.
And I also agree, Ari's very insightful in the FTI members meetings. He's always got great stuff too, and also in his last events and all his events here. But I would say that's exactly why I frame the five intentions as a tribe, because it acknowledges our biology, but it also says we can have a more unifying like tribe, one that doesn't exclude people to their detriment, right? One that doesn't make an enemy of anyone. And as was mentioned earlier, the easy path is to make someone an enemy and to create a tribe around, having a common enemy. I'm trying to create an inclusive tribe, so it's harder, right? It's harder because I'm not making an enemy other than to say an unreasonable person. But even them, I don't think they're an enemy because I don't think anyone I would consider unreasonable, I don't think they would see themselves as an unreasonable person. And, ultimately, like I think yeah. So all I'm saying is and I also don't think that anything bad should happen to them if I think they're an unreasonable person, even if they're not part of, even if I don't think of them as part of the FTI tribe. And I would still welcome them into the FTI as long as they could remain polite, right? So we want diversity of opinion. And so I love the quote you said about be true to your own faith while being a blessing to others, regardless of their faith. That's great, and I'm constantly impressed at how much wisdom there is in Judaism, considering how little I learned from reading the Talmud. So I didn't read it with rabbinical commentary, and that was my problem. Then I read it again in rabbinical commentary, and oh my God, it's so much better. So, but anyway, do you have anything you want to say to that, Ari?
I was just no, just more of the long lines of groups are absolutely necessary, and
Yeah,
really, it's basically magical thinking to pretend you can't have groups. And tribes, as Mike, I will honor Mike's statement, that tribes are not necessarily the same thing as groups, but if you scale it down, the family is a tribe. Two friends, they're a tribe, right? So
yeah,
it's just this is like good philosophy. This is a matter of definitions, but
yeah.
it's the idea of two paradoxical ideas that at one point we want to say we're a universal humanity, but we're also experiencing everything in our particular ways. And
Yep.
it's the particularity meeting the universal where groups emerge, tribes emerge. It's just, it's just, if you want to pretend they don't, then you get things like tribal, like you get nationalism, chauvinism,
Yep.
Marxism, all these things that are just awful versions of groups.
Right. And I agree with you. Groups are necessary. And all I was saying is that we can be a part of a group of humanity that agrees to these common five intentions. And then we can have all the subgroups we want within those five intentions. And even some people won't agree with the five intentions. And those people, the people who agree with the five intentions, will say are unreasonable. And I've met them. I've met a few people that didn't agree with the five intentions. Now, when I asked them why, and I asked a number of times, I said, "Oh, well, we're just using different definitions. It seems like you actually agree with the five intentions," and they insisted that they did not. So, I can just tell you that that's what what I discovered by listening with empathy. Sorry, Mike, did
I'll
you want
just
to?
just really quickly. I agree that I think the search for connectedness, the desire for connectedness, is a healthy thing, and I think it becomes unhealthy basically when you have an out group who you see as your enemy and
Yeah,
who you try to destroy. So I think we're agreeing a lot more than disagreeing, Ari. And it is partly just a definition of
I totally
terms.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say we are sort of in this group implicitly making an enemy right away. We're enemies of people who refuse to be polite or think politeness is evil, right? So there are basic things like anyone who would actually say, no, being reasonable is a fallacy, it's a magical thinking. Well, then you would
exactly.
say it's the idea that's the enemy, not the person, because if the person changes their idea, they're not your enemy. So in this case, I might make the argument that the tribalism is healthy when you can differentiate based on ideas rather than assuming a person is that idea.
Right. And that's
I,
where I
I
think
would
that,
just say if you
go ahead.
disagree with somebody, that doesn't mean you're an enemy. To me, an
Right.
enemy is somebody who you want to harm.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah. Does that make sense, Ari?
Totally. I'm happy to move. I don't want to dog the conversation, so I think it's time to
No
let other
worries. It's
people
because we have four
do
hands
things.
up. So, but,
Yeah.
good conversation. And David, how are you? What's on your mind?
Hi, you marched me right up to my question. What you're proposing sounds like a wonderful ideal, but how about Hitler and Mao and Stalin? Where do they fit into this world?
So Hitler had didn't have a philosophy like this, right? He created an enemy. He wanted to exterminate the enemy, which were not just the Jews, it was also the gays, it was the cripples, it was black people. He wanted to exterminate all the people that he made into the enemy. So the thing that is different about this versus all the people you're describing is they all made an enemy and went out to try to kill them. I'm not trying to kill anyone. I'm just trying to unite people amongst a common banner of good philosophy. And I would argue Hitler didn't even have a good philosophy in general. His philosophy was might makes right, which is pretty age old. There was nothing novel about it. Um, and I could go into more differences, but that's I think the most important one.
Yeah, but that was philosophical. How about the man coming to kill, all our fathers?
What do you mean?
What do I mean?
Yeah,
He attacked Poland, he attacked Czechoslovakia, he attacked France. He was going for Britain and he's coming for us.
right. So I'm
How does that
missing.
fit into your
Oh, so
ideal
if
scheme?
sort of, if you look at someone that is going to cause significant unnecessary harm at scale to the entire world, they become threat number one to everybody. And I think that's exactly what happened with, with Hitler is the reason that so many people, including the US eventually, although we took a long time to get into that war, way too long in my opinion, there were a lot of Nazi sympathizers in the US, right? So we took way too long to come in. But like, what happened is people saw the horrible things and learned about the horrible things that the Nazis were doing. And so it unified most of the rest of the world to fight against the Nazis. And it was really an authoritarian versus it was mostly authoritarian versus non-authoritarian, but not exactly. And basically it was it started out that way, and then Russia came on the Allies side. Won't go into the details, but yeah. So basically, preventing significant unnecessary harm is the first priority of the FTI once you understand the truth clearly. And the first three intentions are about understanding the truth clearly, and then it's about preventing significant unnecessary harm. So that's the first action we try to prevent. Hitler and Mao, etc., they all caused massive amounts of significant unnecessary harm. Does that make sense, David?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I just worried we're gonna be hugging each other, not prepared for
No, no, we have to be prepared.
evil
And
in the
in
world. Yeah.
fact, if world peace is important to you, David, I would highly encourage you to look at I'll put the event, pardon a small sound thing, but I'll put an event where I have a proposal on how to actually accomplish world peace that I'm now talking with someone who has um uh good connections in this area, and we'll see if anything comes of it. Here we go. Free Thinker Institute Global Peace. Um, I think there's a actually very simple way, deceptively simple way to on world peace, to create world peace and without a long time period actually end human rights violations. And it includes the five intentions in some respects, but not. I didn't talk about them in that presentation, but I think they will be a part of actually making that happen. So that said, Anna, good to see your hand up again.
Thanks. Well, I remembered I got back on my train of thought, what I was thinking.
Good.
So as far as groups, as far as these cliques go, so even if we have all the same values, right? Like we're still going to end up having cliques.
Yeah,
But it seems to me like, having groups of some sort.
yeah.
But it seems to me that the key would be um, what kind of groups are permissible. And I would think in order to have peace, it would have to be the kind of groups that do not have any kind of potential for hierarchy. So what kind of groups? Like hobbies, interests, um, you know, arts, like stuff like that. Because, socioeconomic status, which is money, is going to bring hierarchy. Religions
Just
definitely can bring hierarchy.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
Countries,
like I want to understand your perspective better. So what
yeah,
makes you think hierarchy would not be okay based on the five intentions?
because it's going to create enemies. If we have hierarchies and people want to, like, I'm better than you or you're better than me or yada yada, it's going to create
Yeah.
right? So
So
that's why I'm thinking we can't, I mean, in
yeah,
order, if for it to be like anyway within grasp,
yeah,
like values have to be the same, hierarchy has to be minimum, and whatever groups that are going to exist would need to be all on the same playing field. So those are interests, hobbies, arts,
yeah.
not
I hear you.
hierarchical, right? Does that make
Yeah, I hear
sense?
you. I understand where you're coming from, but I think there might be a different approach. The reason I believe you think hierarchy is not good is because you're talking about specifically, I think about socioeconomic hierarchy, where if you have some people who are impoverished and some people who are billionaires or even get to be trillionaires, then there will be such a sense of innate injustice that the poor people are going to rise up against the wealthy. Is that a fair assertion or
I
interpretation of
mean,
what you're saying?
sure, yeah, to some, yes, yes, I guess
So
so.
So remember, the fifth intention was to make sure every human being on Earth makes $100,000 USD a year in purchasing power parity. At that point, no one is impoverished, no one's even poor. You literally have enough wealth that everybody is doing a-okay, and more money doesn't even make you more happy. So the people who want more money are choosing that as their purview, like money is important to me, so that's what I'm going to go after. And great, you'll have a yacht. That doesn't make you any happier than the guy who's a garbage man making six figures, right? Low six figures compared to your eight figures, but he's might be happier than you because at that point, more money isn't what's going to make you happier. Good philosophy will. And maybe the garbage man has better philosophy than the yacht owner, right? Which
Yeah,
wouldn't be the first time that happened. So, sí, mi amor, papi está
yeah.
reunión, princesa.
So within the yeah, I can see that. I can see that. And within that value range, that might work. Just, I guess right now to try to wrap my head around, I just don't know if it's realistic, but yeah, I like that idea.
Thank you. Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. And to be honest, Anna, right now we're headed in the opposite direction. We're getting to be increased socioeconomic disparity, and the Trump bill actually may further that. From what I only saw bits and pieces. I'm not sure about that. So I stand. I may be corrected when I research it more carefully, but I can say that socioeconomically we've been getting more and more divided over the last 40 years in the U.S. And so we're not headed in the right direction now. Part of why I want the FTI to grow is to try to help us go into a direction where the fruits of our labor are shared by everybody, not just the wealthy. So yeah, not necessarily equally, mind you, because I don't believe that we should all get an equal amount of wealth no matter what we do and where we are and how capable we are and how hard we work. That is a great recipe for failure economically, which, all people who have tried communism have learned, which is why China is not communist anymore. So anyway, Sunny, how are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to, I think it is Anna. I hope I'm able to um uh, express what I heard. I think there was a hesitation when it comes to religion and how five intentions, how you can use religion because it's very divisive. I wanted to kind of put something in the chat here. Recently, I had the opportunity to go to um, a conference where it was just so fascinating. I've heard about interreligious dialogue and all that, but this is different. It's called a multi-faith neighborhood network, and where they have these three people, a Jewish, a Muslim, and a Christian. There's no hiding of their belief system. They come with their complete belief in what they believe. There's no hiding of their identity, but they work together for the common good, and they have accomplished something amazing. You know, as a peace initiatives in different countries, and so that it's possible. We assume like we know one religion is fighting against another religion. That's the normal understanding, but here is something. I mean, it blew me away. Going to this conference and hearing what they have done. All these three people. What the imam is actually the imam of the national uh, masjid in DC, and the rabbi is another person. And anyhow, it's just so fascinating. I put the link if anybody is interested.
Thanks for doing that, Sunny. And I also put a link in that is from a lot of the world's religious leaders, a lot of the top religious leaders in the world of different faiths, talking about how everyone of every faith should make friends with other faiths, people of other faiths. And so I do think that religion has historically divided us. I think the modern religious leaders themselves are all about unity. There are people leading human beings to division in the name of religion, but I don't think it's the actual spiritual people who understand that religion's values that are the ones doing that. They're people who are wolves in sheep's clothing that take a religion and try to use it to forge anger and hate with people rather than to actually go with the spirit of the religion. People who actually follow the spirit of any religion have a huge amount of wisdom coming from it and ignore the bits and pieces of the religious texts that might preach hate and anger and killing. So that said, David, you've been quiet
Hey,
tonight. Good to hear from you.
I've been listening, you know. Actually, it's interesting. I like your idea of 100,000 per person for the entire year, entire world population, because I agree 100%. If everyone had the 100,000 a year, then I think, tribalism would really not even be an issue. However, I think tribalism is like inversely proportional to resources that people have, so that, in a dicey situation, you're more tribal than in a wealthy situation such as what we enjoy here in North America, or at least in Canada and the US. So that was, so I thought, yeah, 100,000 for everyone. Whoa, what's not to like?
Yeah.
We wouldn't even be talking about tribalism.
Well,
Um, the
yeah, I
only,
don't think that's the only thing that's required. I think good philosophy is required along with it because money alone doesn't buy happiness. But I appreciate that you like that. And part of it came from doing a lot of deep thinking about how much people are angry at the wealthy and saying there shouldn't be any wealthy people. And that, I think if everyone had enough money that they weren't worried about money, they wouldn't have a problem with billionaires, right? I don't think anyone would mind if there was a billionaire as long as they're not worrying about putting food on the table, right? But if you're not
yeah,
putting food on the table and you see this guy with this huge, massive yacht, it's like,
yeah,
wait a minute, this isn't fair. Like it innately doesn't feel fair.
yeah. But if
And
you knew how bad yachts are for maintenance and all the rest,
I
you'd
know,
feel
right?
sorry for the yacht owner, and you'd be happy just to
Fair
have to
point.
worry
Fair
about,
point. And think about all
But
the
anyway,
jobs that the
I'm
yacht building
joking.
made, right? So, except
I
that's
mean, I'm
money
joking,
that
but
will never get a return on investment. If you're a good investor, you don't invest in a yacht. It's a depreciating asset. So, but
yeah.
but if you have so much money you don't know what to do with it, then yes, definitely buy a yacht. Absolutely.
Okay.
So David,
That was my second. I had one other point, actually. I had
do
two.
you mind raising your hand? Because David Fagan, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Feel free to correct me. David F. Had his hand up, and we do one question at a
Well,
time, if you don't mind,
well,
David.
I'll just add to one thing you're discussing right now. If you
Yeah,
Google GDP per person worldwide, you're going to get an answer like $15,000.
yeah. Thank
So
you.
it's easy to talk about 100,000. It's hard to imagine a world where we're not killing each other if we've only got 15,000 to work with.
Well, I agree with you, David, and that's why I say this isn't going to happen in my lifetime. But if you look at the modern USD dollar equivalent of the average citizen of the Roman Empire, it was about 500 USD per year in purchasing power parity. Now, if you look at the 1900 USD in the US equivalent, excuse me, equivalent, it was about $5,000 modern USD. If you look at now, we're at about I think it's 65, 70,000 in the US. So if you look, and it's going up obviously exponentially fast, given those three numbers. If you look at 50 to 100 years from now, the average GDP per population of the population of the world is going to be well over $100,000, probably closer to two, three, $400,000. You'll still have plenty of room for billionaires and trillionaires, but you can also make sure everybody makes 100K a year. Now,
I,
David, you're right that if you divided up all the wealth in the world, we wouldn't get there today. So I'm not suggesting doing that. I'm suggesting rising tide lifts all boats.
Can I throw out a number? I,
Please.
I just went on Gemini, Google's Gemini, and the number they come up with, based on today's numbers, is 59,000.
For what?
If we divided the world's wealth equally among all people in the world, each person would get $59,000 if we did that today, according to Google Gemini.
David looked at GDP per capita, so that's income. It doesn't take into account like existing wealth, like redistributing existing wealth. So thanks, Mike. That's helpful. It means that dividing up, like if we sequestered everybody's wealth and divided it up, we would get closer, but I don't recommend that either. That's a recipe for failure. But at least we know that the amount of wealth in the world is certainly getting closer to the point where we could have that amount of wealth in people's pockets. But the other difference is that's dividing up the amount of wealth per person, Mike. That's not per annum income, right? I was saying
Mm-hmm.
$100,000 per year that's coming in. So we still
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of economic growth. But guys, I will tell you, AI is going to change the game here. It's going to make so much more money for everybody. And if you're not using AI, start using AI because the only people that will be jobless are the ones that don't know how to use AI. And I will say, if you don't know how to use AI, like 10, 20 years from now, I hope you're retired.
I
Because
sprung 20 earlier today. I sprung from the $20 a month to get Gemini Pro from
yeah,
Google.
well worth it. Gemini and GPT are
Yep.
the two that are in the ahead, and they're worth every dollar of it and more. Like AI is the biggest invention since the internet. I've been saying that since I first learned about it. Like probably within 6 months, I realized that and started implementing it into educational software. So it's mind blowing what it's going to do for the world. So that said, David will be the last hand because we're at 8:55. Well, we can probably take one more, but go ahead, David R.
Oh, yeah, I guess my comment was, it's going to be a small comment. It was just the idea that somehow humans are, desire connection and it's a blank slate and we can connect with anyone equally, which I totally disagree with. I think part of the tribalism is the fact that we resonate and connect much easier with people with similar um, background, ideas, values, whatever you want to say. The more similar, the more we can connect easily. The less similar, the harder it is to connect. So this is part of the tribalism thing. It's not like somehow our desire for connectedness works against tribalism. It actually supports tribalism in the sense that we connect easier with different people. That's my point.
Yeah, tribalism helps us have a uniting common value, like a common factor with other people. The part where it's tricky is, and I think I forget who made the point. I think it was Mike that said the place where tribalism goes south is when it starts to make an enemy and cause significant unnecessary harm to the enemy because they are less than human enemies. And that's where tribalism goes really dark, and that's where I'm proposing a version of tribalism that is unifying and elevates the members of the tribe as well as the non-members of the tribe, quite frankly. Because even the unreasonable people would benefit because they'd be making six figures, right? So,
Yeah.
hey, like, look, have some unreasonable people making six figures, but don't have an extra million homeless people, this year, right? Like, let's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, tribalism is inversely proportional to wealth or resources available. So,
Well, it doesn't
the
have to
question
be.
is,
Yeah.
are the world's resources enough for the 8 billion people? That's number one. And if they are, can it be equitably distributed to everyone? And I think the answer to both of those is no. So I think the rest is kind of pie in the sky. Sorry to say.
No, it's okay. I don't think the socioeconomic part has to be there. We can all adopt the five intentions, even while the world is too poor to make everyone six figures. We can adopt the five intentions and help improve the situation to at least lift as many people as out of poverty as fast as possible as we grow in economic wealth and create a more unifying society where there's not a risk of global, nuclear Armageddon. Rich, right now it feels like we're, just a couple of wrong moves from being in a global, like a nuclear war, and like that's not a good place to be as humanity. But I would love to.
I asked AI, speaking of, you were saying you should ask, I asked AI whether what is it called, where AI will make everyone so rich it'll be post, there's a name for where there'll be enough stuff for everyone and we won't have any needs. Post a surplus for everyone. Anyway, and AI said there's a very small possibility that AI itself will create a world in the future of post. Come on, somebody must have heard of this term. It's a very common
I know
term.
what you mean, but I'm not thinking of it. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm
You
not
know,
saying that AI
post-humanism?
alone.
What was that? LBJ? What?
Well, post-humanism, the
No, not post-humanism. That's something else. That's where you put your mind into a memory bank. No, this is post need, like post shortages, post.
oh, you're talking about like Venus Project and
Yeah, basically, all I'm saying is I don't think AI alone will do it, but the five intentions plus AI will get us much closer because
I agree
AI
with you,
is going to
Garrett.
make us much more productive. Like it's
Yeah.
already like, made me and my team and my company and companies that I've worked with way more productive. Like the value add of the companies that I've been a part of using AI is so much higher. And so the economic growth is going to be huge. And when that, that's the rising tide lifts all boats. I've said it 4 times now, probably. But so that's where AI is going to be an enabler, just like the Industrial Revolution was, just like the internet was. These have been like major factors in increasing wealth for people.
Post scarcity is the term.
Post
Jenna
scarcity.
came
That's
up with it.
Yeah. So
Post
AI alone
scarcity.
won't
But
do it.
I asked AI, AI is pretty smart, as you probably agree. So I thought, well, I wonder what AI thinks about AI and whether it'll actually create post scarcity, which some people believe pretty strongly. But it said the possibility of it is under 25% and actually probably a lot lower. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess, for tribalism. Thank you. Hello?
Yeah, I'm just
Oh,
checking whether or not AI and the five intentions, whether or not AI says um, yeah. So if you add the five intentions to the mix, it'll change its mind.
oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's
At
interesting.
least it did for me.
You're a genius, Garrett. You managed to get AI to change its mind. That's whew,
Well, no, it's adding a new factor that it didn't take into consideration. You only gave it part of the story.
wow. I just asked post scarcity.
Yeah, but it
What's the
doesn't know about
chance?
the five intentions. So you have to add that in.
I
That's where, like,
defer.
look,
I defer. I
I'm
defer.
standing on the shoulders of giants here, right? I think the five intentions are really valuable. Like it's hard to come up with meaningful rules. It took me over a decade of thinking about it and more than hundreds of hours to come up with the five intentions, and I still think they may change, right? They're not perfect, right? And I don't think that they should be dogma. I think that they should be useful, and I think that we should use them if they're useful and we should share them with people and get feedback. And if someone has a reason that they're not good, bring them to the FTI leadership team and we'll talk about whether or not they need to change. I
Maybe
just
we should,
added being polite to the five intentions like within the last few months,
and
right? It
maybe
didn't
we
used to
should
be there.
add religious dogma to it too.
What's that?
Maybe we should, with the five intentions, add religious dogma too, and see if it changes its mind. AI.
Oh, you'll have to do that one, Sonny. I wanted to quickly mention there was something that Beta mentioned, which is if we're applying the five intentions of tribalism, then we pivot to discussing community, shared values, inclusionary efforts, all more community oriented. So is the question, how do we build community versus how do we apply the five intentions to tribalism? And I would kind of agree with that. I think that it is more about how we build community. And what I'm trying to do is build a community with the common values of the five intentions. So that's the goal. Um, and I would love all of your help. If you agree that the five intentions are good, let's build a community together, right? And let's do something that will add value not only to your lives, but to the lives of people we can influence. And then that will in turn come back to us in a boomerang of virtuous cycle where when our friends and family follow the five intentions, they'll seek to influence us in a positive way too. And that creates a virtuous cycle of philosophy and ideas and thoughts and actions that helps all of us be more successful. So, with that said, I'm going to let you guys go because it's a few minutes after 9. Would love to see people in next week's event on neurotypicals. I'm going to add it to Discord. I forgot to add the slide links in the chat. But thank you all for coming for the great comments and questions and suggestions and conversation. So
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
everybody.
you, Garrett.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye bye.
Yeah, good night.